Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy podcast. Today we're joined by Michael O'Rourke. How are you doing today, Michael?
I'm doing great, Dylan. How about you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm doing excited, super psyched to chat with you on this call. I normally would say what the title is of the company you work for, but you guys just went through a rebranding. So can you tell us what your title is and the new company you're working for?
Yeah, I'm the CEO of Grove Infrastructure, formerly known as Pocket Network Inc., which, as I'm sure you can imagine, can get confusing having Pocket Network Inc., Pocket Network Foundation, Pocket Network DAO. So as the protocol grew, it felt very prudent for us to separate the actual company from the protocol itself.
Perfect. Yeah, I work in a blockchain ecosystem myself that has this bifurcated sort of three-headed monster that leads the direction of the ecosystem. So super psyched to dig into that in a little bit. But I kind of want to jump into the deep end here. And I was watching one of your previous podcasts where you mentioned that in 2017, during the crazy ICO boom, that 80% of all the activity went through one server, essentially. So you brought up this really philosophical kind of question that got my gears rolling, and that if we have 80% of the activity going through like a single server, then that makes the opportunity for a nation state attack on a network to kind of be possible. So to jump off into our conversation, how do these decentralized systems we're building really compete against that? Because the nation state is the singular entity that has this all encompassing power, and we're just a hodgepodge of peer to peer networks. So, from your perspective, what is the ways in which these decentralized networks can amalgamate, work together, and empower one another to prevent a sort of nation state attack in that sort of scenario?
Yeah, you're not kidding. We're really jumping off the deep end here. Yeah, so I think there's two pieces of this. There's kind of the supply and the demand. And in a traditional context, whether it's Amazon Web Services or something like that, Amazon owns both the supply and the demand of every piece of the stack, right? They host the infrastructure, and they also have the different startups and users and so on, developers building on Amazon Web Services. So for me, it's about separating those two things and creating the ability for people to basically build businesses on both sides of it. And if you have a large enough market that is global, you can then actually begin to fight against any individual nation state attack, for example. So as to use Pocket Network as an example, we've got a supply side that's quite global. We're hosted in where we have people running nodes in 20 plus countries, and we're in the part of the evolution to have the same thing happen in the demand side, and that's where I think the real magic comes in, because we have Grove here, which builds on Pocket Network and is offering RPC service as a US based company, but by being able to give the opportunity and enable others to build our same business around the globe with their own take on it, their own technology, whatever it is, you then have created a system that is supranational or above the jurisdictions of just the United States, for example.
Awesome, thanks. How did you get to this point? What was your kind of career trajectory since studying in Florida and then ending up here? Because 10 years ago this wasn't a field, and now 10 years later we're building not just blockchain networks but like services for blockchain networks, and now, as you just mentioned, supply and demand side services as well. So maybe just kind of give us like the short umbrella overview of what your time has been like since you graduated from USF.
Yeah. Well, it took me a little bit longer to graduate, about 8 years. It took me a while to find my way, but throughout my time at USF, I worked at some credit unions here in Tampa, selling loans, and saw thousands of credit reports. You see how messed up the financial system can be for some reason, and that was in 2011 and 2012. And I would say that sufficiently radicalized me for when I read a Bitcoin article on Wired magazine in 2013. Ended up on the subreddit, read the white paper. Having not being born in this country, having used Western Union before, I kind of understood it pretty quickly, and just kind of kind of drank the Kool-Aid from there in 2013. While I was at USF, I was studying international studies. I wanted to be a diplomat at one point, and throughout that time, learned to code for iOS. I had already been coding for about a year before I graduated, and then started to professionally be an iOS developer for a few years before I met my startup co-founders, or my Pocket co-founders in Sarasota, Florida, back in 2015, 2016 timeframe.
We were speaking before we hit the record button. I myself am a former Floridian. And so one of the things I really like about Colorado, you might have been to ETH Denver, maybe not, but we have this really robust blockchain community here. And you've actually been really active in the Tampa Bay, St. Pete Bay area, in the local blockchain and crypto community there. So what is just like the vibe there? What's the scene like there? Are you working around a bunch of builders? Are there founders there? What's the type of interest level for your local community?
Yeah, it's not quite as builder focused as like say New York or Denver in some cases, but it's actually gotten a lot better over the years, or at least necessarily better is not necessarily the right word, but it's definitely evolved over the last few years. Shout out to Gabe and Rosa for running the Bitcoin meetup every other Wednesday since 2013. Back then, it was four or five of us. You'd have a couple older Floridians come in and say, "What's this Bitcoin thing?" And then you'd start to have the cloud miners come in and try to sell their stuff, which ironically, Pocket in some respects is running infrastructure in a different kind of a cloud. And it's really evolved over the last few years. I used to run the Tampa Bay blockchain developer meetup when we were first starting Pocket, and I was learning Solidity, and that started to build a few people. And now I went to a meetup earlier this year, and I'd say it was like 50% builders and 50% people who are just interested in the space, want to understand more and learn more. So I think it's a pretty healthy mix, which is pretty cool. And they still to this day host this meetup. Sometimes mostly virtually. Now it's once a month in person, but it used to be every other week in person.
Yeah, I was just gonna say before cutting you off, it's kind of really refreshing right now to be. This is probably your third or fourth bull bear cycle, but it's really refreshing to kind of be in the grips of 2023, which is a little more existential than the 2018 bear. We have at a high level, a high national policy level, we're starting to talk about blockchain and crypto and all this. So you're getting the sense that there's folks who are kind of like unfazed by this. You're starting to see builders kind of come out the woodwork.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's still the case. I mean, if you were in Denver or ETC, I think the energy is super clear. I mean, we do have two major headwinds. Obviously, the regulatory situation, and also really this is the first time crypto has been in an environment where money isn't free. So I think we're kind of figuring out how to grapple with that. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you go to any one of these more developer focused conferences, you're seeing more and more people building every single day, and more interesting things being built in hackathons, more professional things, and for me, that's just incredibly inspiring and exciting. It's always been the case. It's just what price isn't always an indicator of the activity, and historically, we've consistently seen that increase over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, like we're seeing magnificent numbers of the national debt kind of going up by hundreds of billions a day now. So I guess kind of that 2013 version of you that first stumbled on Bitcoin, who had these experiences of sending money to family and friends abroad. Maybe that rings a little bit more true, or continues to ring a little true to you today. That kind of rhyme and reason for why Bitcoin exists. But something that I'm also really interested in is while you were learning iOS, is this when your kind of interest in Solidity peaked? What made you want to start building on Ethereum when you first learned that you could code smart contracts?
Yeah, it was actually after the DAO hack when I first tried out Ethereum, actually. So this was had to have been fall 2016, after the DAO hack, and I just remember reading about it, going to the Ethereum subreddit and seeing Solidity. I was pretty knee deep in kind of the iOS thing, and I was like, oh, I can try to write a smart contract. And there's only been a couple of times that my mind has been just truly just blown when I write some kind of software, when I've written some software in the past. And the first time was the first time I made a HTTPS connection where I was actually pulled data in and showed it to the screen. I was just like, wow, this is barely hanging by a thread. And if this is how the internet works, that was just a very kind of mind blowing moment. And the second one was really the first smart contract I deployed because, I deployed the software and like I knew no one could mess with it. And having, use like the Twitter API, the Facebook API, the Google API, and literally getting kind of rug pulled by them changing it and us having to scramble to adjust something or fix something. Just the idea that, you could just change this text because I just allowed it and no one else can do anything about it was just another one of those kind of mind-blowing moments. And that's really when, my co-founders and I really started thinking about what to do and what to build in the space.
Yeah. So before we kind of jump into Pocket Network and Grove and the Pocket Network Foundation, a lot of our audience, they're not like, this isn't the first time they're hearing about Bitcoin or Ethereum or even various different blockchains or cryptocurrencies. But granted that, you kind of are in the weeds and you're a builder, can we just like go over just a really simple term and just kind of Eli 5 what RPC nodes are?
Yeah, the best way I can describe it is every time you open up a wallet, either on your phone or your computer, and you see the little loading screen before you see your balance, and then all of a sudden you see you have like 5 ETH on your MetaMask wallet, for example, that data comes from a full node, and that comes from services like Pocket, what Pocket is set out to build. So at the end of the day, really what we do is allow developers to read and write data for their users. So when you make a transaction or when you're seeing, your balance on your wallet, that literally just comes from services like ours.
I'm not sure if it's the case today, but last year you guys were churning through quite a large amount of traffic on a daily basis. So, what is the kind of level of use and activity that you're seeing with Pocket Network today?
Yeah, we stayed pretty stable, generally in the 1 to 2 billion mark. We grew very quickly and for context, this is still a drop in the bucket. I think I would estimate there to be somewhere between 100 and 200 billion daily RPC requests a day that are actually paid for that, developers need. I think there's a bunch of other kind of free traffic, but let's call it just the world of which people actually pay for it and need it, really really deeply need it. So we're doing 1 to 2 billion of that, 100 to 200 billion today. But really we built out the network. We launched it in 2020, and really it was kind of the first network of its kind. And that first year we really spent just kind of fixing things. We forked Tendermint. We had a bunch of issues scaling the network on the supply side, and then we had to figure out, okay, we have all these nodes, like how do we do this quality of service thing? How do we make sure that a developer can get their data, or the user can get their data in a meaningful amount of time? Because if you're going to wait 5 seconds for your wallet balance to use, you're going to be like, screw this, I don't want to use this wallet or this app or whatever it might be, right? So that was when in the second year of Pocket is when we really kind of figured that out. The protocol was stable. We got to a reasonable level of latency and quality of service. And I said reasonable, this is about 500 milliseconds or half a second. And we were doing maybe like 5 or 10 million requests a day at the time. So we just said, screw it, let's open the floodgates and let's see how far this can scale. And our assumption was that the more scale we would get, the more we would understand the edge cases and the problems, and therefore improve the quality of service as we went. So yeah, we went from about 10 million requests to over a billion in about 10 months. And we were like, okay, this works. The whole thing actually works at scale, at a meaningful scale. And that's really what led us to Grove and where we are today. But that was a really fun and exciting time because I still wake up today and I see Pocket Network and I'm just like, holy shit, this thing is like coordinating infrastructure on a global scale without taking any rent and picking the nodes and sending the traffic. And it's just, it's really a mind-blowing thing. And a billion of anything is a lot. And for us to be able to get to this scale has just been really, really incredible. And really since then, once we got to that level, it's been like, okay, one, this is costing us a lot of money on infrastructure. Two, we've got some decent amount of some awareness. Now let's go in kind of the next phase where it's like, let's prove out the business so that not only us can do it, but many others can do it, which is, calls back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of this call.
Yeah, so congratulations on moving fast and not breaking things.
Well, lots of
So
things
what
broke. lots of things broke. Let's be clear. Lots of things broke.
what are the networks that Pocket Network supports, integrates with? I noticed you mentioned Tendermint, but you're also talking about Ethereum. So is this like a multi-chain sort of network? What does it look like when a brand new chain, let's say a new app chain from the Cosmos ecosystem wants to integrate with Pocket Network? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's more of a coordination problem. It's more like, hey,
Okay.
there's a user or a customer who's like, hey, I need Evmos, for example. And then we'll go and say, hey, okay, we can support you for Evmos as kind of the main kind of gateway or portal provider, and say, hey, let's do this. We say, so for us, it's more of a coordination problem. So we put out kind of the bat
Mhm.
signal to the supply side of the network, say, hey, we're gonna launch Evmos and whitelist it on the protocol so that you can get paid. Because you can list any chain, but you have to get whitelisted on the protocol as a chain ID to actually receive POC for serving the traffic. And then, let's say by Halloween, because we're here in October, but by Halloween day, which is a bad idea to launch a chain on Halloween, but either way, we're gonna launch Evmos on this date. That gives the node runners enough time to say, hey, spin up their infrastructure if they want to support it, and then we go ahead and send some tests and effectively launch it on that day. So and the difference there from kind of a centralized company is that they own the entire stack and have to maintain and update a lot more software as one single monolithic organization than what we do as a very much more nimble, small kind of gateway company, right? You can kind of think of Grove as more of like the Uber for nodes, if you will, where we don't
Mm.
own or control any of the supply, but we help manage the demand side there.
Cool. And I think I'm following with where you're going with this, but I just want to clarify. Can you just Eli 5 what you mean when you're talking about with RPC node infrastructure, what you mean by supply side and demand side?
Yeah, so I view supply and demand as the supply side are the people actually running the nodes themselves. So this is we've got dozens of different folks that are running many different nodes for many chains that we support as Pocket, which is over 40 today. And then for me, the demand side
Wow.
are the developers who need access to that nodes.
Okay.
So Grove provides kind of this portal so that developers could three clicks, get an endpoint, and then put that in their application and just start building, right? And it's our job, not just as Grove, but eventually many other providers on top of the network to drive that demand traffic to the supply side or the node runners of the network with, as best quality of service and everything that goes on with that.
Perfect. So you guys launched in 2020. This is like DeFi summer, like EVM is still mostly just Ethereum, like rollups are years away. Maybe people are starting to talk about Avalanche and Cosmos. So during the tenure of Pocket Network, you guys have had to kind of like adapt to these new Alt L1s that kind of arose in popularity. You had to adapt to these L2s that also kind of became more and more used over the past few years. So as you guys are building this infrastructure for decentralized networks, what was it like with this onslaught of the rise in these new chains and also having to like keep up with adding support to Pocket Network as like more and more not Ethereum chains became popular?
Yeah, well, I've always believed that we're going to live in a world with tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of blockchains. So we designed Pocket such that it would be very easy to add these chains. And at the end of the day, we want to go where the RPC traffic is and
Mhm.
which means where the developers are effectively, right?
Mhm.
So that first year, we just supported Ethereum in Pocket, and we made the explicit decision to um, add as many chains as possible. So to give you an example, what really helped catalyze our growth back then was, we decided to add a Harmony as a blockchain in 2021, and they had an app called DeFi Kingdom start to just absolutely explode on the Harmony chain, and we had already
Yeah.
supported them. And there was a moment in time when the kind of foundation operated RPC was having issues or went down, and all of that traffic ended up settling on Pocket, right? So for us, it's always been, kind of skating where the puck is going in the sense of trying to support these chains and growing with them, especially as their ecosystems grow, and really trying to kind of leverage Pocket's unique properties and help these communities and these blockchains grow as well.
Yeah, that's really cool to just kind of be there and ready for when those kind of parabolic movements happen. So how does Pocket Network earn fees, earn revenue, earn an income? Is it in the Pocket token? Are you earning tokens on these various different networks that you guys are supporting? What does that kind of economic model look like?
Yeah. So forgetting about the networks and the customers and stuff for a second, Pocket Network is a mint, burn, and stake model. So rather
Okay.
than transferring value direct via fees or state channels or something like that, what we do is we have the demand side. In our case, we're facilitating all of that. We buy and then burn POCT, which results in minting. Well, it doesn't result in minting. Every time someone creates an RPC request, that results in a mint on the supply side. And eventually, once we get to an equilibrium, you'll have the emissions or the total supply in effect be flat of Pocket, meaning the burning will be equivalent to the amount of POCT being emitted by the supply side. So what we do is we really transfer this value by buying and burning POCT. And then on the other side, the supply side. And we just, from first principles, we just found that this was a far more efficient way for us to transfer that value than kind of incurring this cost of coordination, where, if you think about a network of 1,000 validators and you're sending fees constantly and they're constantly coming in consensus around those fees, that gets really expensive very quickly. And if you think about just the inertia of just a one-time stake that slowly gets burned, and then they are then emitting or minting this POCT in batches, basically. That's a much more efficient way to really transfer that value, which is why we landed on this model.
So there's three kind of entities that are in the Pocket. Well, charging the direction of the Pocket ecosystem. So you have Grove, you have the Pocket Network Foundation, and then you also have the DAO. So can you just kind of, I have a few questions for each of them, but can you just kind of like elevator pitch? What are the three entities? What are they responsible for? And then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah. So just to set some context, blockchains, many blockchains, in my opinion, if you draw a triangle between a government, a corporation, and a religion, a blockchain just is right in the middle, right in the middle. And we intentionally designed the network and the governance and everything around it such that it kind of reflected what we feel like a new institution or a new country governed by its users would look like, right? And definitely took inspiration from folks like Dash, who I think were probably the first to actually have a foundation actually governed by its masternodes back in the day. But we, kind of mapped it so that it fit Pocket's use case. But we basically have the development company, which is the core maintainers of the protocol, which is Grove, right? Formerly known as Pocket Network Inc. We've shifted from being a company that is kind of building out this network, that we built out the network that we launched, to now shifting into building the business on top of the network and showing others how to do it as well. And with that change in, let's call it, incentives, it's really critical to have a credibly neutral steward of the protocol and facilitator of the protocol itself, which is where the foundation comes in. The foundation comes in because the world doesn't know how to really work with a DAO. If you go to some corporation or whoever it is, you want to throw a conference, whatever it is, or you want to hire someone from the DAO, that infrastructure really wasn't there to begin with. So we made sure we had this foundation that was able to be nimble enough to make decisions and have the capital to be able to facilitate and allocate to whatever it is that is to the benefit of the network, purely as that kind of an entity. basically. And the important part here, learning from things like Tezos and Aragon and some others that have had some issues with like their foundations and development companies and this sort of thing. And it was really important for us to have the Pocket DAO actually be able to have oversight and control over the foundation's directors. So what we did is we actually created this foundation in the Cayman Islands, and we chose the Cayman Islands because they had the flexibility to say in the actual creation documents, the Pocket DAO can hire and fire the foundation directors via vote. Kind of taking that metaphor from countries, especially, we designed the Pocket DAO, which is literally anyone in the Pocket ecosystem, whether you're a node runner, demand, community member, doesn't matter, to be able to claim a vote to vote on the protocol's matters, right? So the Pocket DAO really votes on three main things: the monetary policy, protocol upgrades, and the treasury. So we have a certain amount of POCT that gets emitted that goes into the Pocket treasury. And the DAO basically governs and manages all that, on top of making sure that the foundation are good actors and are doing things, within the will of the DAO. Because if the DAO says, hey, go allocate, $1 million to this thing, but they go and steal it or take it or something like that, well, now the DAO can actually fire them and replace them, which is really cool, in my opinion. And when taking the company metaphor, we have Grove in here that is really trying to not just enable ourselves, but many others within the ecosystem as well. So that's kind of a quick overview of kind of the three main entities. That said, there's dozens of other entities that are contributing to the protocol, and individuals and this sort of thing as well.
Yeah, let alone the businesses that are coming to build on top of Pocket Network and everything like that. So that's really super cool, actually. What's a politically correct way to phrase this? Have you guys gone through any transitions where you needed to effectively leverage the power of the DAO to oust somebody who was acting in a negligent manner on behalf of the foundation?
No, thankfully. I was actually on both the foundation, and and obviously I'm CEO of Grove. I willfully and willingly stepped down from that, and we now have three fantastic directors, Jack, Dermot, and Nelson. And they also have their own independent team as well. So there's a clear wall now, actually, between, for example, Grove and the foundation. Before this year, that wasn't the case, but also the foundation wasn't really active or doing anything. So that separation, as the protocol grew, as it became more decentralized, as Grove started to move into more operating a business, those incentives are really, really important to separate, because it's very, very clear if those things are intermingled, it gets very complicated very quickly. So it's very important for us to make sure that the stewards of the protocol, such that the foundation actually owns the Pocket Network IP and everything around that, and the trademarks and everything around that. The foundation owns that, and it's really important for them to be the steward, the credibly neutral steward of the protocol. And in many ways, they have really the hardest job, because they have so many different constituencies that they have that they work with, and everyone. More people, more entities, more complication. So, which is the nature of these things.
Well, I mean, also more people, more complications. That's a good thing. You guys were focused on building a protocol, and now you're focused on building a business. So, what was that inflection point like? When did you know that now, 3 years later, after you guys built Pocket Network, you were like, okay, it's time to separate the identity of Pocket Network Inc., create Grove, and really, remove Michael from the foundation and put you into this new role where you're looking to onboard new businesses, onboard new teams as a business use case, and not necessarily as core developers to build out the infrastructure?
Yeah, well, to be clear, we the core team is still under Grove, but what's really nice is that the foundation has hired a PM, Mateo, who's fantastic. So they're kind of, this kind of leads into the foundation being the main facilitator or the Schelling point behind the development of a protocol like Pocket. I kind of see a future where we'll have many entities with their own R&D protocol development teams contributing to the protocol. And I think Bitcoin and Ethereum are very clear and obvious examples. That Coinbase or BitGo or BitPay, forgive me, for example, hire Bitcoin protocol engineers to contribute, because it does also help their business. Maybe they need a UX improvement where some important Bitcoin contribution helps make things a little bit easier, for example, right? And I wouldn't say it was one main inflection point. I'd say it's more of consistent tension points where you see in your mind, if you're making a decision, you're like, this is better for the protocol for the business, or vice versa, right? And you want to be able to just separate that as soon as possible before it gets too intermingled. And I think we did that, frankly, at the perfect time. And thankfully, we've got Jack and Durbin and Nelson, who all three of them I've worked with for really since 2014 in earnest. And there's really no one who I would trust more to actually be operating the foundation today. But yeah, it's just kind of you're making decisions and you're just like, this is not fully aligned. And what's really nice is that now it's been an evolution. It's not an easy thing to do, but really the real harmony is getting the business incentives and what the business is building purely and perfectly aligned with what the protocol's incentives are. And I think that's where we're heading to, and I think we're going to be in a really good place related to that.
Yeah, that's super cool. So what are kind of the business use cases you're looking to attract now that your focus is on Grove? You guys have done this rebrand. What are kind of like the next steps or the focal areas for you over the coming 2 quarters?
Yeah. So every single, let's call it DePIN protocol most of them are going to have the same challenge that Pocket Network has. And this is a question of who is building the software that's going to enable as many businesses as possible to operate on these networks. And what I mean by that is, I used Uber as an example, right? Now we have, Uber, Grab, Line, you name it, right? But these are all independent businesses that are just fully, that are kind of full stack, if you will, rather than using the same underlying infrastructure across the globe, right? And the question is, is the foundation going to build out the software, give it out, and have it at the races, or go our route, which is build out the software, open source it, and enable as many businesses as possible, as easily as possible, to build on top of Pocket, right? And the way they like to think of it is we're the first gateway, but I want to see a world with hundreds or thousands of gateways on top of the network. I think that's dictated by scale, by the market in terms of like what developers are building, what's being built. I think these things are dictated by even regional things. Like if I'm in Bangalore, India, or Buenos Aires, Argentina, I could build a local gateway, for example. So the question that every single, let's call it DePIN protocol, is going to ask themselves is like, how much space is there for how many businesses can be sustained by the underlying infrastructure of the protocol? And that's really going to be dictated by scale and the amount of economic might that each one of these protocols is harnessing.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned name brands that we would recognize in our house: Uber, Lyft. These are companies that exist and everybody knows who they are. Are the kind of folks that you're starting to work with, are we migrating towards mainstream names, collaborating with Grove and building on top of Pocket Network? Or are we still dealing with like Metamask and things that crypto natives know?
Yeah, I think more on the financial side, yes. I don't think it's actually within, it's against Uber or Airbnb's incentive to actually look into this, because it's to their benefit to own the entire stack. I think you see this with some of the larger kind of AAA gaming studios with everyone's like, why are you not putting NFTs in your game so that other people can use this? Because it's going to take away from our margins, right? So I think at least on the kind of general marketplace side of things, it's less important because it's not within their kind of incentive structure, if you will. That said, I think it's pretty clear that some of the more financial side, fintech, these sorts of apps and these sorts of businesses are definitely looking at it in different ways. I mean, look at Robinhood. I think folks like like Fidelity, OGs in the space, looking at it, for example, or have been looking at it and continue to. So it's more on that side, in my opinion, rather than on the let's call it the marketplace side. Now, there may be someone that sees an opportunity there and says, "Hey, let me leverage this," but I haven't really seen too much of that out of outside of like a Nickelodeon selling creating like an NFT marketplace to, to improve their brand, right? But that's more of a media company, right? Rather than a marketplace business.
Yeah, this is kind of a philosophical question, and maybe requires some beers rather than coffee. It's still daytime here. But you did mention that like these decentralized protocols are essentially going to eat away at the value add that like a large conglomerate has when they silo their own tech stack. What does the world look like when, let me take a step back. Like banks are starting to look at integrating DeFi protocols and doing more than just simply custodying Bitcoin and Ethereum. They're starting to see that there are alternative uses for these decentralized networks. And if they don't start building and learning how to use them in a decade or two, they might become irrelevant. So, what does something similar look like for just big name brands that still want to own their entire tech stack? What does that kind of inflection point look like for our future when these big companies are realizing, holy crap, there is actually benefit to outsourcing to these decentralized open source public networks, and maybe we can build on top of this rather than fight it?
I think it'll be scale and size of the market, and as we kind of chip away at their customers, right? What's really cool about kind of the DePIN space is that all of us are kind of getting away from this self-referential, let's call it DeFi thing that happens where it's the same money kind of moving around within the various different, blockchains or DeFi apps or whatever it might be. Just to give an example, right? I was on a panel at Sorry Mainnet a couple of weeks ago with the folks from Demo, LivePeer, and Helium. And Helium launched a $5 a month cell phone service using their hardware, for example. Demo has got this plug-in thing in your car, and it's actually creating real, tangible benefit for blockchain people in the world, right? We're in a different position because we are primarily catering to blockchain developers, but even then, we're able to offer prices or advantages that is literally impossible for them to offer. So I think it's going to be a slow chipping away of increasing our market share as a collective relative to where these folks are until one day they're going to see and decide to integrate, build their own thing, whatever it might be, to credibly compete against it. I think as collectively, we are effectively building an institution that creates optionality for more users around the world and really driving more competition for the world as it exists today.
Awesome. I love it. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, just supply demand. When there's more demand for this sort of everlasting supply that will actually reduce costs for large scale existing industry and enterprise, that's when we really start to see kind of these DePIN networks take off. And that's something I also want to touch base on. I've been kind of a degenerate since 2017, and I love when these new kind of acronyms pop up. And I have to really admit, DePIN is something that caught me off guard. I haven't really seen much in terms of this term being used before 2023. So it seems like Pocket Network, Helium, and these others are kind of really pioneering in this space and kind of giving it a name now. So can you just, Eli 5, what's DePIN? You gave some examples already, so we don't really need to dig too deeply into it. But like, what is DePIN? Does it have to be like a company like Helium that sets up these wireless nodes that cell phone users can now tap into? Or could it also be something like tap and go experiences where there are NFC readers at a conference and you can tap your phone and kind of interact with the blockchain network? What does the whole spectrum look like?
Yeah, so I think Sorry coined this actually and have been pushing it, which makes sense why it was a panel, but it seems to have caught on. And for better or for worse, I think it's actually good to have a separate umbrella relative to like DeFi as an example, right? And DePIN is decentralized physical infrastructure networks. So if I'm building a device that allows people to scan their NFT, if it's not connected in some way or somehow to a blockchain, I wouldn't consider that under DePIN. But it's a pretty broad umbrella, right? You have Pocket Network that is incentivizing people to run to buy servers or run bare metal infrastructure. You've got LivePeer that is doing what they're doing on the video side of things. You've got Helium that's incentivizing people to run these actual devices, right? Either in their homes or elsewhere. Gmo's got this little physical device that you put in your car, for example, right? The storage networks like Arweave, Filecoin, storage, the name, the protocol called storage also fall under that umbrella. So I think it's a broad umbrella, but I think it's nice that it creates a distinction of the type of protocol that we're building.
Right. And so how does Pocket Network kind of fit into the whole DePIN umbrella? If it was just me taking a glance from the outside looking in, it would just essentially be providing the infrastructure for these different networks to communicate with one another.
Yeah, today it's just RPC. I think tomorrow it'll be things like indexing, supporting storage networks as well. So layering on top of an Arweave or a Filecoin or an IPFS, for example, like you can host LLMs. You may be able to host LLMs on Pocket, right?
Mm-hmm.
And incentivize people to run these models locally, right? For example. So I view it, there's a pretty well-known framework to thinking about the internet called the OSI stack, where it's 7 layers. And it's basically from the physical infrastructure layer up to the networking layer and everything in between. And there's dozens of protocols in each of those 7 kind of layers. I view kind of it's called the Deepin Stack to be in a similar way, where you can kind of pick and choose, like as if you were at a shopping store. Like I'm going to use Fleek for hosting. I'm going to use Filecoin for my files. I'm going to use Pocket for my RPC and indexing traffic. I'm going to use and I'm going to plug in Helium for whatever reason, because that's the business that I'm building, right? So we're kind of building the core infrastructure to allow, I think, the future entrepreneurs of the world to actually build things that were literally impossible before, right? I mean, it took the internet was in ARPANET back in the early 60s. It took 50 years to get to mobile, which was just, which then changed everything, right? In terms of how we live in our lives today. So I think we're kind of seeing the puzzle pieces get put together and enabling people to pick and choose what pieces they would like to use for whatever interesting business that they'll be able to build in the future.
Yeah, that's super cool. I remember when I was first getting into the crypto space in 2017, one of the things that everybody was throwing around was we're still in the early days. This is the equivalent of the internet in the early 90s. So now that we have the advent of things like DePIN, we're starting to see these various different types of distributed services that could be added to a tech stack to like better provide for an existing business's needs. I guess kind of where do you view we are now as an industry with the advent of things like DePIN and the fact that Pocket Network does need to exist? Is crypto still in the 90s if we're using the internet metaphor? Have we made a bunch of progress? Is progress kind of slow and trudging? From your perspective, where do we stand in terms of Web3 mass adoption aligned with like how the internet was adopted?
I would rather look at the kind of time scale, right? And knowing that over time, or each consecutive technology that gets built, whether it's a communication technology or coordination technology, ends up getting to market more quickly or getting mass adoption more quickly. So if the internet, took 35-ish years for kind of its Netscape moment, and we're year 13, 14 into this experiment, I'd say we're probably 5 to 10 years away at this point from something meaningful that really impacts the world. I'll give an example. Like back in the 90s, you had ISP providers popping up like left and right, and I remember a story of another founder in this company. He built an ISP provider in Canada, and it got to the point to where he couldn't buy enough copper wire to support the neighborhoods that needed the access to the internet, right? And I don't think we've gotten there yet in our space, where literally everyone in the world is just trying to access this thing. And I don't think it's going to be like I'm going to try to access the blockchain. I think it's going to be some set of apps or something that meaningfully improves our lives in such a way where it's like, holy shit, I have to use this, or this is really helping me out, or whatever it might be. So I still think we're a ways away from that. If you look at it at a time scale perspective, but the infrastructure that we're all building kind of in this Deepin space is super hyper critical for this. At the end of the day, and if you look at our scale as an industry, I mean, if there's 100 to 200 billion, let's call it RPC requests, just at the, talking about pocket land here. Like, Facebook is doing, quadrillions of RPC requests, right? So we're still just a tiny, tiny fraction of the scale. And as we get to more scale, that's going to introduce more problems that need to get fixed, right? I'm a very big believer in Fred Wilson, who's a pretty famous investor, wrote a blog post years ago called the App Infrastructure Lifecycle, where kind of the app growth drives building an infrastructure. The infrastructure is there that allows people to build new things, which then drives the infrastructure again. It's a really, really amazing blog post. And I think, you kind of see it in the cycles within our space, right? Everyone's like, we have all this infrastructure, we have so much block space, where are the apps, right? As an example, where you just see it if you're on crypto Twitter, talking to people in conferences and that sort of thing. So I think we're just kind of in a part of the cycle, and due to crypto incentives, we're actually able to, I believe, compress those cycles more so than we might have before.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just the thing that I keep thinking about right now. If it's the topic of the day, if you're listening to this in 4 years, it might be something different, but Friend Tech right now is kind of the major crypto native killer app. But we're still seeing, like, for instance, today I'm seeing all these forks and a lot of people kind of getting wrecked off of corners that were cut because they were able to get SIM swapped, or the fork just wasn't built as well as the initial protocol was. So I guess, where are we, like, moving forward? Who do you want to work with next? Do you want to work with the Friend Techs of the world, or do you want to work with, like, the big mainstream, big brand names to kind of help slowly onboard and ease them into leveraging these decentralized protocols? What's kind of like Grove's plan of attack now that you guys have rebranded?
Yeah, we want to enable as many businesses as possible. So whether that is, a large, Fortune 500 company that needs to operate their own gateway with a certain type of node, for example, or that is the it's called the Polkadot RPC provider, or the person who wants to build a social business around a data business around, like let's call it decentralized social, for example, or gaming, or DeFi, you name it. We're kind of looking at everything, either enabling that or directly working with them ourselves. And a big part of the rebrand, obviously, was just to separate, but also kind of elevate the business, and which I'm super happy and excited with it. I'm really happy with it. Very big believer in this kind of solar punk kind of meme, if you will. And there's a lot of people who are really spending a lot of money and focused on improving, or getting to space and trying to exit, and which I think is important and critical. But we're building. Grove is dependent and built on basically a coordination technology, and for me, that's kind of what it really highlights to is building the infrastructure so that we can really all settle on these public goods while enabling as many entrepreneurs as possible.
Kind of wrapping up, you said you had to end at the top of the hour. I want to ask kind of like a high level question. You've been in the space, you're like legit an OG now. You're 10 years into the space. As an industry, do you think we've matured slower or faster than you initially would have thought of 10 years ago when you first read the Bitcoin white paper?
Yeah, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have thought we would have been, colonizing Mars by now. I was way more optimistic about the pace of things. I think the truism, what is it? It's something, I'm paraphrasing here, but things don't move fast until they do. There's some phrase there, but I think we're realizing how much hard work there is, and where we're seeing the friction points in the real world, with policy, with actually building useful things for people, rather than, and these are just hard problems that just take really smart people and a lot of time to build. But once the things get put together, I think then we'll see an incredible inflection point. I think similar to what we're seeing with AI, for example, and that's been around for much longer. People have been trying that out, trying to figure that out for much longer than crypto has at this point, right? So for me, it's these next 5 to 10 years that are going to be just incredibly exciting, and it's just so interesting being in this moment in time, because there's a lot of cynicism in the space, and people are like, you're not really at the bottom unless people are existentially questioning like why they're here in many ways, and you see that all over in crypto, in Twitter, and in person, and you know, I really do believe things aren't as bad or as good as they seem. And at the end of the day, if you look at kind of the fundamentals, and everyone is there's just incredible amount of incredibly smart people here that are just building great technology, and I think there's going to be plenty of people that can find that can understand it and be able to put it together in a way that really drives the future that we're all trying to build here.
Yeah, for the builders out there, there's no better time to build than during a bear. It is a lot easier to focus. There's a lot less chatter going around the water cooler, and there's a lot less noise. So I guess wrapping up, if somebody wants to get in contact with you to build with Grove, or I guess also if somebody is interested in learning more about the DAO, because it sounds like there are two different kind of roles that the listener might be able to have. What's the best way for folks to get in contact with you to learn about the services that Grove can help provide a company? And what's the best way that maybe a listener or a Pocket hodler can participate in the DAO?
Yeah, I would join the Pocket Network Discord, and also the Poctopus Den, which is the Telegram chat there. Related to, there's a ton of great people there that are really able to answer any questions. And on the Grove side, you can definitely ping me on Twitter. It's my last name, just with an underscore instead of an apostrophe, at O'Rourke. So, but also, if you want to keep up with just what's happening in Pocket Land, I'd recommend Poct News. We don't know who they are. We think it's just a amalgamation of people, but you know, these folks really keep up. They really do a good job of amplifying everything that's happening in the ecosystem, and it's quite incredible to see.
Awesome, Michael. It was great to chat with you for an hour. I was really excited to dig in and kind of get a little nerdy, and you exceeded my expectations. So thank you so much for sharing this time to talking about the cool things that you're working on and to share your insights. It was really awesome.
Thanks, Dylan. It was a pleasure, and it was awesome talking to you.
Cheers.